let's get started. The agenda here that we have, we're going to kick off with some introductions, just a little bit more about Kinsero, who we are, what we do, and about our panel today. We'll also from there get into some of the roadblocks that users face, just what are the business users actually encountering when they outgrow their existing finance and accounting systems. And then from there, we'll go into some of the insights that we see here at Kinsero with our clients and just with business users we interact with in the marketplace as to where do they actually go once they outgrow that existing infrastructure. And then finally, we'll have some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, please don't hesitate to go ahead and put them into the chat, and we'll most likely have some time to answer them at the end. We'll also include some additional resources and blog posts. We'll be sending out a recording of the conversation today for everybody, and we feel that can help inform your decision-making around scalable finance and accounting infrastructure. Okay, so I already introduced myself at the outset. A little bit more about me and my role here at Kinsero. I oversee our private equity and venture capital investor relationships. And I've been with Kinsero since 2020 and have been an operator in fintech and with financial services companies since 2016. I'm also joined by my esteemed colleague, Jennifer Daniel. She's our director of operations here at Kinsero, and Jen works day in and day out with our internal operations here, but also with our clients, so CEOs, CFOs, and finance leaders at investor-backed companies. And then last but not least, we also have Allison Wasserman. So Allison is a friend and client of ours here at Kinsero, the co-founder and finance leader at True. And True is a software solutions company and AI lab backed by Long Ridge Equity Partners, who we have a long-standing relationship with here at Kinsero. And Allison's input will be extremely valuable today, given her experience upgrading True off of QuickBooks and into a more scalable and robust accounting software. And before we get into the presentation, just some quick high level on Kinsero. Business was founded in 2006 by Scott Tynes and Bill Klein as a modern alternative to actually building and staffing a full in-house finance and accounting team. Today, we have over 1,500 employees and over 250 clients who we support with our finance and accounting or FAS solution. And finance as a service includes really two things. So one is actually a finance transformation. So that's looking at people, process, systems upgrades, and getting companies into an optimized state. And then the second piece is actually helping with ongoing managed services within finance and accounting. And that could be everything from month-end close accounting to FP&A to fractional CFO support. You name it, we most likely can do it. And it's worth a conversation to figure that out if any of you are evaluating systems and team on an outsourced basis. But we'll get more into Kinsero and finance as a service as we go through the presentation. For now, I'll just turn over to Jen, who could speak specifically to some of those challenges that companies are facing as they outgrow their finance and accounting systems.
Thanks, Tony. So today we wanted to take time to discuss the signs and the indications of outgrowing your general ledger. We're looking at this from the scale of, QuickBooks and Xero being some of the most common accounting platforms that businesses will start out with, which is a great tool at that phase of your business, but that quickly can be outgrown when your business begins to scale. So we have a list here of some of the most common themes that we see and we hear day in and day out of users of QuickBooks, whether it's going to be limitations on users and role functionality. One of the most recurring themes is manual processes and an inability to support the complexities of your business, whether that's industry specific or from a gap specific requirement. It's going to really slow down your team and your inefficiency. So I won't read through all of these blocks, but this is really what we're seeing and what resonates with most of our users. And bringing Allison into the conversation, where we wanted to focus on is, as a QuickBooks user, where were her pain points managing her finance function?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Great question. When I look at this list, some of these common disadvantages really speak to me more than others. The lack of scalability and the manual process were my two biggest issues. I just found that I was doing so much work outside of QuickBooks, and every time that there's another manual entry in another Excel spreadsheet, it just introduces another opportunity for human error and another another report that needed to be reconciled when it was entered into QuickBooks, and that was a huge issue. As we grew, you know, I was finding that QuickBooks was great if I was running, you know, a small hardware shop, but as a growth phase technology company, it just didn't have certain reports and certain the ability to retain certain data and to measure certain data. Something like recording bookings, future bookings before clients went live, or being able to analyze client churn and upsell opportunities, different, you know, all that was done outside of QuickBooks, and it just became so cumbersome to be able to generate meaningful reports for management every month.
Great feedback. Thanks, Allison. And kind of to Allison's point, the top three that I want to focus in on today resonate with Allison's points as well, is the manual effort specifically around revenue recognition outside the system, the inability to support reporting, and looking at that more for managerial reporting, not just, you know, accounting P&Ls. It's truly being able to get to that underlying data, or what we might say the KPI data, is that really show the growth of the business and the performance of the business. And then lastly, when you start looking at scale, is compliance risk and audit risk. QuickBooks is a great system, but it's also very easy to override and modify your accounting records, which imposes a huge risk for the organization. And so we're going to bubble that down in those being the three top points, and we're going to go a little bit deeper on those with the next slides. All right, so the top issue that we see that causes the most pain in the organization is a lack of revenue accounting support within QuickBooks. QuickBooks is designed to support invoicing and immediate revenue recognition. But as your business grows and scales, you're going to have more use cases and more complexity, and you're going to have an inability to consistently apply the accounting methodology when you're using Excel spreadsheets. It's just not going to scale with your growth. And that ultimately is going to lead to an elongated close process, inaccurate reporting, no real-time visibility to your growth and your revenue attributes. We'll see companies spending 20 days just to get the books to a flash report because revenue accounting is taking so much time. So inherently, QuickBooks wasn't designed to support those types of functionalities. You either have to add on a bolt-on or look at an alternative. So this is probably what we would describe as the top pain point, or the top indicator that you're outgrowing QuickBooks, is that you're not able to keep up with the revenue recognition requirements of your business to support your growth. And Allison, can you walk us through what RevRec looked for you specifically?
Yeah, so most of our clients are on some format of a subscription model. So whether it's a flat subscription fee or it's an activity-based subscription fee, either one is not well supported in QuickBooks. So on a flat fee, if a client pays annually, there's really no way of deferring the revenue within QuickBooks. All that needed to be kept outside of QuickBooks. Then there's a whole complexity with the ASC 606 regulation and breaking out the revenue into recognizable license revenue and subscription revenue that's really deferred, like you said, for audit purposes. And what we have often is we have an implementation period, and then the implementation period is typically 30 to 60 days, and then the subscription period starts. So again, there's no way of adding that booking revenue into QuickBooks until it's actually either deferred revenue or actual revenue. It just made, again, being able to look at and project out our revenue something that was very, very difficult within QuickBooks. All that was done outside, it was either done through, obviously, Salesforce.com has some great tools, but also most of it was done in Excel spreadsheets. Again, that meant that at the end of each month, there was a reconciliation process that took a few days just to go through each spreadsheet and reconcile each spreadsheet once the final data was entered into QuickBooks.
Great context. Thanks, Allison. The next point that we're going to go into is the reporting and the lack of more management or operational reporting. And I think this ties into Allison's comments of the KPIs and looking at more of your recurring revenue and your CAC and your LTV. This data just isn't designed to be maintained in QuickBooks. And so when we look at reporting, there's kind of two underlying things that you can look at. There's going to be kind of the revenue reporting, but then there's also going to be more real-time reporting. So when we layer in the complexities of having disparate systems and processes working in Excel, your data doesn't live in your general ledger at this point in time. And so the option to have real-time reporting, to do flash or any kind of pre-close reporting, that's not going to be possible until you've completed all the steps outside of the system to book your revenue. And so when you start needing more management reports, when you know you're going to be going and looking at due diligence, you know that you're going to have investor reporting, QuickBooks instantly is not going to be able to scale with your org. You're going to have to start taking data out of QuickBooks, data out of Excel, compiling that manually. And that's where you start introducing risk at every step. You can have data entry errors. You could produce financials that are incorrect because someone makes a change in QuickBooks and you've already extracted your data. So this really imposes huge risk, which can impact your growth and impact the valuation of your company when you're going through critical exercises such as due diligence when your financials aren't correct. So this is another huge area where you want to focus on making sure you have systems at scale before you need it. Otherwise, you can really impact your business. And Allison, could you go a little bit deeper on what reporting looked like for you and how much of that was managed in QuickBooks versus offline?
Yeah, so again, there was very, very little that was actually maintained within QuickBooks. So I had a company prior to True, and when we were ready to, we actually got to a point where we either had to completely change our accounting system, or what ended up happening is that we had an opportunity to sell it, and we ended up doing that, and the new owners integrated our accounting into what they were already using. But like you said, there's very, very little that we were able to really keep within QuickBooks. And so everything from fixed assets to deferred revenue was a huge one, and bookings revenue. But I'll mention that in terms of management reporting, another really, really great win for us when we did switch to Concero is the ability to let each department head own their own budget and actually view it in real time and not have to wait for, for me or whoever was in the finance department to release the budget. And we're able to give different managers different levels of access so that they can look on their own, see where they are in terms of their budget, their actuals versus budgeted, drill down deeper and get really, really important information to help them run their business unit.
That's a great point. Thanks, Allison. The last piece we have here is lack of internal controls and audit readiness. So I think if there's anybody that's been a QuickBooks user, we all know there's the ability to edit transactions, go back to prior periods. There's the concept of a hard close is somewhat new to QuickBooks, and it's actually challenging to implement because there's control risk of being able to say who can open and close books. So where this becomes a pain, and in our experience working with new customers, where the quality of earnings will come back the most is the lack of internal controls, and that's what's being written into the documentation on these quality of earning reports because of using QuickBooks. So you're really introducing a ton of risk by having QuickBooks as your GL just from a controls perspective, not having approvals, segregation of duties, all of those native accounting functions that you need in a more professionalized accounting function are absent when you're using QuickBooks. And so that's just going to introduce risk for being audit ready based on manual process outside of the system, purely just within QuickBooks. So we see this as being a significant risk for businesses as they scale. Allison, any comments on how that might have impacted you on the internal controls and the audit risks?
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, to me, it all goes back to the fact that so little is maintained within QuickBooks. So you have your outside spreadsheets, and like you said, if anybody even inadvertently makes a change or there's some adjustment that needs to be made, it kind of trickles down and it impacts all the future periods or past periods. And half the time I found that I didn't even notice. And like you said, it for us, it hasn't affected valuation, but there's always that anxiety of if they see that there's a little discrepancy, is a potential investor or a potential acquirer going to say, well, now I don't have confidence in the data and I don't have confidence in the financials. So, luckily for us, it really wasn't an issue, but there was always that anxiety of this is important data that they're looking at. And if they can't trust it and they can't have 100% confidence, then what is that going to do to my company valuation?
Great context. Yeah, and that really summarizes our top three. And I think kind of adding the caveat too of if you're starting to feel some of these pains, you probably know that you might be too late and you've already outgrown QuickBooks. And so trying to look at a proactive lens of, well, what should we do next if this all resonates with you? So really you have two options. You can go ahead and make a decision to switch to a mid-market general ledger. Build that in-house and get that stood up so you can migrate off of QuickBooks and start addressing your rev rec, making sure you have internal controls and more audit readiness based on systems that were designed for that and to give you that better reporting. The alternative that we have is considering an outsource option such as Concero. So we offer a full key turn fast service, which includes a system optimization with our onboarding process where we would manage all of the finance and accounting function. And so Tony, if we want to flip to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
So one thing yep, go ahead, Tony.
Oh, no, I was just going to mention and elaborate on what you already mentioned there, Jen. And the fact is with Concero, we've got a playbook where we're already 80% of the way there versus if companies go the route of building all this in-house, you have to go and find the right people, figure out what systems to implement, get everything optimized over a period of 9 to 18 months based on our research. And sometimes folks will go through that entire process and then at the end of it, we'll end up with a failed implementation. There's a statistic here, 60% of ERP implementations fail, but we'll let you go ahead and elaborate on that, Jen, given your experience, right? Having been on both sides of the fence as a operator inside of a business and then also working here at Concero.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first option that we talked about is trying to build this in-house. And to Tony's point, that can take anywhere to 9 to 18 months. Where this can be really risk at every step is you're looking probably at a not completely professionalized finance function when you're on QuickBooks. Do you have the right people to set up a new GL? Will they have the skill set to know what do you actually need versus trying to recreate what you've been doing? Do you know how to have solution architecture? Those skill sets are very different for maintainers of finance and accounting versus builders in finance and accounting. That can fundamentally be one of the largest risks if you don't have those builders, which leads into that 60% of the failures of the implementations. You have to really define your processes, your accounting policies. Tony, could you go back one more for me? Sorry, it jumped ahead. Getting that all configured, that really does truly take 9 to 18 months from systems of selection to deployment. The alternative with Concero is that we'll have that playbook. This is already going to be stood up. We have 80% of the solution already defined. We come in and customize around your order to cash, which is really the more nuanced part of the business. And we'll be able to have that deployed in 30 to 90 days. And so where we see this helping strategic CFOs is, do I want to build this function or do I want to focus on being strategic and go through those growth objectives that are being set forward by your board or your PE firm? And so this is just kind of the things to think about, building in-house versus another alternative which Concero could support. All right, Tony, we can go to the next one. So leveraging finance as a service. And so this just goes into more detail of where Concero can be a partner if you need to have support in updating your people, processes, and systems. There's some areas that are great that would be for finance as a service. And so if you're looking at bookkeeping, back office support, controller level down, CFO services, this is a list of things that we can step in and really be able to support you. When you've got just a tech upgrade, right? Your people are amazing. There's things that aren't necessarily broken. It might not be the best fit, but making that upgrade to the GL would be. When you have finance as a service, our goal is to bring best-in-class systems and then processes that we've already defined for hundreds of customers. And that's really what allows us to do that quickly. And our goal is to make our clients more strategic, get them out of the day-to-day transactional accounting and focus on growing the business. And so I just wanted to kind of close here, Allison, on your feedback. What strategic initiatives have you been able to achieve and focus on now that you've brought Consiero into the fold as a partner?
So we've been really able to focus on what KPIs really matter and how to get the information that we need to drive the success that we're looking for, whether it's analyzing, like you said, our CAC or our which segment of our clients require either the most support or generate the most revenue. Any of those metrics. There are so many different metrics that we're able to now kind of drill into that we just didn't have the visibility into before. And it's just letting us think a little bit more strategically about how we want to position the business and how we want to grow in which direction.
Great, thank you.
We'll get into questions in just a moment. There's one quote I'd like to share with the audience here, and this comes from our friend Jack McCullough over at the CFO Leadership Council. And we actually did a webinar with Jack a while back, and one of the quotes coming out of that was around assuming your success. And this is something that actually comes up with a lot of companies. They usually ask, well, we're doing okay with QuickBooks and we're getting by. It's not perfect. How do we know it's the right time to do an upgrade? And I really love the way that Jack answered this question, because he said, at some point, you just need to assume your success and invest a little bit ahead of that growth that is coming, so that ultimately you have all of the systems, the process, the infrastructure already in place, so that as you grow and scale, you're not cobbling by on QuickBooks. You're not trying to implement a system that's really robust and tedious to implement when you guys are already at the back end of that growth curve. You want to assume the success early, get everything in place, and short term, it might be a little bit more expensive to go ahead and get those systems implemented, but long term, it's going to be a lot less costly, because you're not going to have to go back and try to build the airplane while it's in flight, so to speak. You're building the airplane while it's still on the ground. So with that, we have a couple of questions already. I think just the first one, and I'll address this towards Jen, is what are maybe other signs I should leave my current finance and accounting software?
Yeah, I mean, holistically, if you're feeling that your accounting isn't able to keep pace, so even if that goes to you can't manage your fixed assets, there's any function that you're having to find a source to do that work or perform that work outside of the core system, those are going to be indicators that you're outgrowing QuickBooks. What we tend to see is you have to hire more people versus looking for technology and automation. So as you're trying to hire, and if that's really outpacing your growth, that's when you need to consider, is this really a Band-Aid, or should I be looking at more automation within the F&A function?